Our next guest is diving into our minds, taking an in-depth look at the decisions that we make and the varieties of factors that impact them. His new book, Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgement, is a handbook on how to make more accurate and fair decisions. Cass Sunstein, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hear that you're here to help us make better decisions. Just flat off the bat, how do you do that? What's the kind of nuts and bolts tips that you can offer?
Well, we need to know what our problems are with bad decision-making to figure out how to solve bad decision-making. And one problem is bias. So we might be really optimistic and think that, our investments are going to go spectacularly well, or our plans are bound to be a big success. And that can be helpful because if you're optimistic, you're probably more likely to do well. But you might be not prudent and you might be a little reckless. So optimistic bias is something to watch out for. You might suffer from or benefit from present bias, as it's called, which means today really matters. Tomorrow's a foreign country, later land, and you're not sure you're ever going to visit. And to be aware that, if you're lucky, you're going to have a long run, and to focus on the short term can create big problems for the future.
So the first word in the title of the book is obviously noise. How do you define noise in the context of decision making?
It's variability in judgment. So if you're a doctor, you might be really tired and make a very different judgment from what you'd make if you were full of energy. If you're a judge in a courtroom and your favorite sports team won the night before, you might think, I'm in a good mood, I'm not going to sentence this person so severely. But if your favorite sports team lost, you might feel sour and be pretty tough on a criminal defendant. For all of us, when we're making judgments, there's variability in our assessments, depending often on things that have nothing to do with the judgment. We might buy a house or take a job or go on a particular vacation just because something happened 2 hours before that impel us in that direction, and it might not be very wise. So to think about how our judgments are often susceptible to features that make them really variable from one moment to another can kind of stabilize us and make sure our judgments don't go awry.
And the book describes a few simple ways that we can reduce both noise as well as bias. What are some of those quick fixes?
If you get a bunch of people making a decision and take the average, it tends to be less noisy and it's often less biased. Another terrific thing to do is to have a guideline or a rule. So when a child is born in the United States, there's something called an APGAR score, which tests how healthy the child is. That makes sure that there isn't noise where one doctor says the kid's great, another says the kid's in trouble. The APGAR score is like a guideline or a rule, and that can really discipline and reduce noise. A third thing you can do is not think, what do I think is going to happen with respect to a prediction, and then just go with your gut. That can be a recipe for bias and also lots of noise. But instead think, what are the several things that would have to happen for that thing to happen? It might be a success with a product. It might be a success with your own plan over the next month. To disaggregate the various pieces of the judgment into maybe 2 or 5 things, maybe 3 or 4, can be a terrific way of reducing noise, where on Tuesday you think of something very different from what you'd think on Wednesday.
Now, your specialty is behavioral economics and public policy. What are some of the systemic impacts of noise in decision-making that you've discovered in your own research?
Okay, I'll give a couple of examples. Think, for example, of hiring, where it might be that someone has a really good interview because they were cheerful or because the interviewer bonded with them. Maybe they had the same name. They're both called Mary. And the interviewer says, that person's great. Now, someone who's identical, whose name, let's say, was Barbara rather than Mary, wouldn't have had such a good interview, or that person might have been in not such good spirits. And that can mean that one person gets the job and the other doesn't for no good reason. So for purposes of policy, and hiring's an important part of policy, we can have strategies that avoid that kind of unfairness and also that kind of mistake. If we're thinking about the criminal justice system, it's really noisy, where there's a kind of lottery, meaning the most important thing might be who's the judge assigned to your case. That's not fair, and it can lead to a lot of mistakes. Strategies that involve guidelines or efforts to aggregate judgments of more than one person can reduce the bias or the noise. We also know that all over the place with respect to customer complaints, how people are dealt with by their employers or by a company with whom they're interacting, investors, there are things that can help reduce both bias, and discrimination is, of course, one form, and also reduce noise, which is a form of unfairness where identical people get treated really differently.
We thank you so much for your time. Such an interesting topic. Noise, a flaw in human judgment, is now available wherever books are sold.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.